Welcome everyone to the 2022 Election Inspector Training. My name is Bobby Zahner. I am the clerk for the Village of Cross Plains. You will need to complete this training and return the signed affirmation before you are able to work at the polls this year. We appreciate your service to the community and are looking forward to a successful election cycle. According to the U.S. Census Bureau, the estimated voting age population of the village is 3,024. As of February 23rd, we have 2,673 registered voters. In our last election, we had 31% voter turnout, including 250 absentee ballots. In even years such as this, there is a potential for 4 elections. A spring primary was not needed this year. The spring election will be on April 5th. Ballots are typically available 21 days before local elections. Included on the ballot for our spring election are 3 seats for the village trustee. We have 3 candidates running: Cody Bratton, Cameron Bjorklund, and incumbent Micah Omikowski. The ballot also will include 6 judicial races, 3 school district races, and the District 28 seat for the Dane County Board of Supervisors. The November election this year will include the race for Wisconsin governor. Following the 2020 census, the village was required to redraw its ward map. Each ward has to have a minimum of 300 people with a maximum of 1,000. Voting is at large in the village of Cross Plains, meaning that each trustee represents the entire village and not just a ward. Therefore, the wards do not need to have equal population, although our goal was to keep the ward population somewhat uniform. We decided to increase from 5 wards to 6 in the event that Cross Plains does plan to go to an Alder-type district sometime in the future. Also, following the redistricting, the village is now back to being in the same supervisory district for Dane County. When the Glacier Ridge subdivision was added about 5 to 6 years ago, they were in a newly created Ward 5, but were in a different supervisory district than the rest of the village. You may recall that Ward 5 had a different ballot for some elections in the past. This will no longer be in the case. It'll be the same ballot for all wards. The Wisconsin Elections Commission website has many training manuals and videos available for the public. For this year's topic, we'll be watching a video on special procedures. About 28 minutes long. And its information covered includes confidential voters, observers, curbside voting, and provisional voting. Here is the website, and then there's just this education training page. And we are going to watch this one here.
Welcome to this presentation by Wisconsin Elections Commission, Special Procedures, Poll Worker Training. The goal of this training is to familiarize election inspectors on certain election day procedures that they may not encounter on a regular basis or tasks that may be assigned to the chief inspector. This is crucial information for new election workers and a good review for more seasoned ones. Let's begin with confidential voters. These are electors who are victims of domestic abuse, sexual assault, or stalking and have the option to be listed confidentially on poll lists. If your municipality has confidential electors, they will be indicated in the confidential section of the pre-printed poll list. This section appears at the back of the poll list. This section of the poll list is not open to the public for inspection. A confidential elector may present their identification card for protected individuals or announce their name and confidential elector identification number rather than announce their name and address. Confidential electors must still sign the poll list if they vote at the polls on election day. The confidential voting procedure follows. Number 1, the voter presents their voter identification card, EL148, that will contain a unique identification serial number assigned to them by the municipal clerk, or announce their name and confidential elector identification number. Please note, a confidential voter does not have to provide photo ID to receive a ballot. Number 2, the voter signs the poll list. Number 3, the voter is assigned a regular voter number. Number 4, the voter is issued a ballot and directed to the voting area. Number 5, the address of the protected individual is not listed on the confidential portion of the poll list. Again, the confidential portion of the poll list is not open to public inspection. Election officials may, upon request, disclose the existence of the list, the number of electors whose names appear on the list, and the number of those electors who have voted at any point in the proceedings. Frequently asked questions about confidential voters. Does a confidential voter at the polling place on election day have to sign the poll list? Yes, a confidential voter must sign the poll list unless unable to do so and marked exempt by the poll workers. Does a confidential voter have to provide a photo ID to receive a ballot? No, a confidential voter does not have to provide photo ID. Please note the related training resources available on the Wisconsin Elections Commission website to help you understand more about confidential voters. Let's move on to observers. Anyone other than a candidate on the ballot for the election has the right to be present to observe the conduct of the election. There is no requirement for observers to obtain a permit or notify the clerk in advance of election day. All observers will be accorded the same respect regardless of their party affiliation or non-affiliation. The Wisconsin Elections Commission has established a set of rules for observers at the polling place or other locations where votes are being cast, counted, canvassed, or recounted. When it comes to observers, it is helpful to designate an observer area, which allows observers to hear instructions and to observe all public aspects of the process without disrupting the activities. There must be an observer area between 3 and 8 feet of the table at which electors state their name and address to receive a voter number. There must be an observer area between 3 and 8 feet of the registration table. A tip would be to mark off the observer area with tape or signage before the polls open or any observers arrive. If observers are unable to hear the election inspectors and/or voters, they may ask for instructions or information to be repeated. Observers should direct questions and concerns to the chief inspector or designee. The number of observers representing the same organization or candidate may be limited if space is limited. Observers should check in and follow direction from the election official in charge of the polling place or other location. Observers must fill out the election observer log, the EL 109, with their name, street address, and municipality, and the name of the organization or candidate the observer represents, if any. An observer must present photo identification to an election inspector. Any type of photo identification is acceptable if it contains a photo of the observer and the observer's name. An election official will verify by marking on the EL 109 that the observer's name listed on the EL 109 matches the photo identification. Heads up, if the observer does not want to provide photo identification or the information on the photo identification does not match the information on the observer log, the individual will not be permitted to serve as an observer. Also, the EL 109 may not be viewed by members of the public or other observers on election day. A copy may be provided after election day by the municipal clerk. A copy of the form should be attached to the inspector's statement, the EL 104. An observer must wear a name tag or badge which reads Election Observer. The name of the observer need not appear on the Election Observer tag or badge. A summary of the observer rules must be provided to each observer. The Wisconsin Elections Commission Observers Rules at a Glance brochure may be used to meet this requirement and is available on the agency website. Observer rules. Observers may silently use cell phones in the polling area. Observers may not use cell phones to take or make voice calls. Ringers should be silenced. Observers may not take photographs or videos in the polling place outside of the exception listed. The chief inspector may prohibit an observer from using a cell phone if it is deemed disruptive. Observers are prohibited from electioneering or interfering with the orderly conduct of the election and/or election administration event. Any observer who engages in loud, boisterous, or otherwise disruptive behavior with other observers or voters that the election official believes threaten the orderly conduct of the activity or interferes with voting may receive a warning from the election official. If a warning has been issued and the offending observer continues the disorderly behavior, the chief inspector should order the offending observer to depart the location. If the offending observer declines or otherwise fails to comply with the chief inspector's order to depart, the chief inspector should summon local law enforcement to remove the offending observer. In the event that the chief inspector orders an observer to leave a location, the chief inspector is required to provide a written order to the observer, the EL 110, which includes the reason for the order and the signatures of the chief inspector, as well as another election inspector, election official representing the opposite party if available. The chief inspector has sole authority to order the removal of an observer, but another election inspector may note their concurrence or disagreement with the decision on the inspector's statement. When an EL 110 is completed, the municipal clerk or board of election commissioners is required to notify the WEC of the incident within 7 days. This notification should include a copy of the EL 110 if available, and the portion of the inspector's statement which documents the incident. Additional prohibited activities. Observers may not conduct any of the following disorderly activities while monitoring the conduct of the election and/or election administration event. Wear clothes or buttons related to candidates, parties, or referenda that are intended to influence voting at the election. Interact with voters, except when asked by an elector to provide assistance in marking their ballot. Watch voters mark their ballots. Have conversations about candidates, parties, or ballot questions. Viewing documents. Observers may examine the poll list so long as they do not interfere with the election official responsibilities. The election official determines whether it is an appropriate time to allow an observer to examine or photograph the poll list. Here's a tip. If voters are standing in line to have their names recorded and to receive a ballot, it is not an appropriate time to allow observers to view the poll lists. The poll list must always remain under the control of the election officials. The poll list may not be handed to the observers. Observers are prohibited from viewing the confidential portion of the poll list. Observers may take photographs of the poll list if approved by the chief inspector. Observers are not permitted to make a photocopy of or take photographs or video of proof of residence documents and voted ballots. Observers are not permitted to handle an original version of any official election document, including voter registration forms and/or proof of residence documents while voters are registering. Frequently asked questions related to observers. Can an observer answer a question from a voter? Yes, if a voter asks the observer a direct question. Depending on the question, the observer and voter may need to take the discussion away from the polling area. What if there is no space for an observer area at the polling place? The clerk should make every attempt to designate an observer area, even if the clerk has to limit the number of observers in the area at any one time. If they are unable to designate an observer area, the clerk should report this information to the Wisconsin Elections Commission. Please see related training resources to help you understand the observer process. Curbside voting is next. A voter who, as a result of disability, is unable to enter the polling place may elect to receive a ballot at the entrance of the polling place, according to Wisconsin Statute 6.82 sub 1. The voter may receive assistance in marking the ballot if required from an election inspector or from any other person of the voter's choice, except the voter's employer or an agent of the elector's labor union. An unregistered voter may also register to vote curbside. Let's go over the procedure for curbside voting. First, the election inspectors announce in the polling place that an elector has requested a curbside ballot, and the inspectors are going to the vehicle to view the voter's proof of identification. Tip: if having 2 election inspectors leave the polling area would result in fewer than 3 election inspectors in the polling area, voting must stop until the election inspectors return. Next, the 2 election inspectors go to the vehicle and speak to the voter. The election inspectors return to the polling area and announce that they are issuing a ballot to the voter. The inspectors should ask the voter if they are unable to enter the polling place. If the voter indicates he or she is able to enter the polling place, curbside voting may not be used. A voter's dog in the car, for example, is not an acceptable reason to cast a curbside vote. The inspectors should ask the voter to present acceptable proof of identification. The inspectors determine if the voter may vote a regular ballot or provisional ballot. Step 3. The voter is not required to sign the poll list. A notation, ballot received at poll entrance, exempt, is made in the signature line of the voter on the poll list. Step 4. Two inspectors initial the ballot. A voter number or provisional voter number is issued to the voter and recorded in the voter lists. Step 5. Two inspectors deliver the ballot to the curbside voter in a security sleeve. 6. The curbside voter marks the ballot or has an assistor mark the ballot for the voter. If there is an assistor, see assisting electors in the election day manual. Number 7. The inspectors return to the voting area and announce, I have a ballot offered by voter's name, a voter who, as a result of a disability, is unable to enter the polling place without assistance. Does anyone object to the reception of this ballot? Note that if an objection is made, you need to follow the challenge procedures under challenging electors in the election day manual. 8. If no objection is made or after any challenge is resolved, the ballot is deposited in the appropriate ballot box or tabulating equipment. Finally, the incident should be recorded on the inspector statement, the EL 104. Frequently asked questions about curbside voting. Can a voter with a dog in their car qualify to vote curbside? No, only a voter who, as a result of a disability, is unable to enter the polling place may request to vote curbside. Can a voter also register to vote curbside? Yes, a voter may also register to vote curbside. What if the number of election workers in the polling area falls below 3 during the administration of a curbside vote? If the number of election inspectors falls below the minimum of 3 required in the polling area, all voting must stop until the minimum of 3 election inspectors is restored. Do the election inspectors have to immediately administer a curbside vote when a voter requesting one arrives at the polling place? Election inspectors do not have to immediately administer a curbside ballot if voting activity in the polling place is very high, but they should make every effort to do so as quickly as possible. Can a voter in the wrong polling place vote curbside? No, a voter can only vote curbside at their correct polling place. See the related training resources for additional information about curbside voting. Let's move on to challenging electors. When there is reason to believe that an elector does not meet the qualifications to vote or has not adhered to any voting requirement, the elector may be challenged. Only election inspectors may challenge an elector for failing to adhere to a voting requirement. Challenges that may be brought by any qualified elector of the state, including election inspectors, are as follows. Citizenship, if the voter is not a U.S. citizen. Age, the voter is not at least 18 years of age on or before election day. Residency, the voter has not resided in the municipality for at least 28 consecutive days before the election. Felony status, voter has not completed the terms of their sentence. Competency to vote, voter has been adjudicated incompetent to vote. Bet or wager, a voter has placed a bet or wager on the election. Voted previously at the same election. If a voter has already cast a ballot in the election. You should know any challenge based upon an individual's appearance, speech, or inability to speak English is unacceptable. While the challenge process is a public process, it is recommended that the challenge process be conducted away from heavy traffic areas. Some challenges may only be brought by an election inspector. Those include physical disability. A voter's claim of a physical disability does not prevent signing of the poll list. Photo ID. The photograph on the proof of identification does not reasonably resemble the elector, or the name on the poll list does not reasonably conform to the name on the proof of identification. Clerk instruction. Municipal clerk has instructed the election inspectors to challenge the ballot because the clerk does not believe the person requesting a replacement ballot is the original voter. Voting requirements. Any other failure to adhere to voting requirements. If an election inspector is offering the challenge, another election inspector should administer the process. All challenges must be made for reasonable cause as outlined on the challenge documentation of the inspector's statement, the EL 104C. The election inspectors should use discretion when administering a challenge and attempt to document the challenge in a calm and respectful manner. All challenges are recorded using the challenge documentation section of the inspector's statement. The form lists the procedures to follow and questions used to establish the challenge. All challenges are recorded using the challenge documentation form, and it is attached to the inspector's statement. The challenge procedure follows. Number 1, the challenging elector is placed under oath and asked to make a sworn statement giving the reason for the challenge. The challenging elector is then questioned by the election inspector using the questions on the challenge documentation form to provide reasonable support for the challenge. The chief inspector makes the final determination of the validity of the challenge and if it is for a reasonable cause. Step 2. After the challenge has been made and supported under oath, the challenged elector is placed under oath and asked to make a sworn statement in response to the challenge. Indicate sworn on the poll list. If the challenged elector refuses to make a statement under oath, the elector shall not be given a ballot or permitted to vote. Step 3. If the challenged elector has responded to the challenge, the challenging elector is given the opportunity to withdraw their challenge. If the challenge is withdrawn, a ballot is issued with no special marks, a notation is made on the inspector's statement, and no mark is made on the poll list. Step 4. If the challenge is not withdrawn, the election inspector administers the oath of eligibility to the challenged elector. Once the oath has been made by the elector, a ballot is issued with the voter number and section 6.95 marked on the back of the ballot. Once the challenged elector has marked the ballot, it is placed by the elector into the ballot box. The entire challenge documentation is completed and attached to the inspector's statement. A notation of challenged and the reason for the challenge is made on the poll lists, and the appropriate sections of the inspector's statement are completed by the election inspector. Frequently asked questions about challenged electors. When is a challenge unacceptable? Any challenge based on an individual's ethnicity, accent, or inability to speak English is unacceptable. A notation of the alleged grounds should be made on the challenge documentation form. The challenge should be dismissed and an unmarked ballot issued to the voter. Can an election inspector challenge a voter if they believe the photograph on the voter's photo ID does not reasonably resemble the voter or the name does not conform to the name on the poll list? Yes, both are challenges that may be brought by an election inspector. See the additional related training resources to help you with challenged electors. Finally, let's talk about provisional voting. Wisconsin voters who are unable or unwilling to provide their Wisconsin driver license or state-issued ID card number, or are unable or unwilling to provide photo ID, must be offered the option of casting a provisional ballot. In Wisconsin, provisional voting is only used in 2 situations. 1, if an individual who attempts to register to vote at the polling place on election day has been issued an unexpired Wisconsin driver license or Wisconsin-issued state identification card, but is unwilling or unable to provide the license or state ID card number, the individual may vote provisionally, even if driving privileges were revoked. The number of a Wisconsin driver license or state identification card that has expired or been canceled is not required. Wisconsin DOT/DMV maintains a help desk for individuals to call if they need to look up their driver license or state identification card number. The phone number is 608-266-1069. Select option 1. Individuals who have an unexpired Wisconsin driver license or valid Wisconsin state identification card may not use the last 4 digits of their Social Security number to register. The second situation is if an individual is unable or unwilling to provide an acceptable form of proof of identification, then he or she may vote provisionally. If the election inspectors do not believe that the name of the elector conforms to the name shown on the proof of identification, or if the elector does not reasonably resemble the photograph on the proof of identification, the elector's ballot should be challenged. Once it is determined a voter will vote provisionally, the following procedures are required. 1, every provisional voter must complete a provisional ballot certificate envelope, the EL-123, in the presence of an election official by providing their full name, complete address, including municipality and county, date of birth, indication of U.S. citizenship, date of election, signature, and date. Number 2, the election inspector completes the certificate envelope by signing and dating the envelope and indicating the type of required information, either driver license or state ID card number or proof of identification, by checking the appropriate box or boxes on the certificate envelope. 3, the election inspector issues a provisional voter number, which is recorded on the poll list. A voter number is not issued to the elector at this time, and the elector does not sign the poll list. The number is issued sequentially, starting with 1 for your first provisional voter. The provisional voter number is also recorded in 6 places: on the back of the ballot, the inspector's statement, EL-104, the provisional ballot certificate envelope, EL-123, the provisional ballot reporting form, EL-123R, on the poll list or supplemental poll list, and on the provisional voting information sheet for the elector. Step 4. The elector votes the ballot, seals the voted ballot in the provisional ballot certificate envelope, and returns the sealed envelope to the election inspector. Step 5. The sealed certificate envelope is placed inside the inspector's certificate for provisional ballots envelope, the EL-108. The election inspectors record the name of the elector, the provisional voting number, and the reason for the provisional ballot on the provisional ballot reporting form and on the inspector's statement. The inspector's certificate of provisional ballots envelope, EL-108, must be kept secure throughout election day. When the polling place closes, the inspector's certificate of provisional ballots envelope, the EL-108, must be secured in a separate ballot bag with a tamper-evident serialized numbered seal. The serial numbers shall be recorded on the signed ballot container certification attached to the bag and on the inspector's statement. The bag should be marked provisional ballots. Step 6. Election inspectors must provide the elector with the provisional voting information sheet and should check the applicable reason that the provisional ballot was issued. Step 7. An elector who is issued a provisional ballot may return to the polling place before 8 p.m. to provide the missing documentation to the election inspectors. Election inspectors shall review the provided documentation to determine if it is satisfactory. If the provided documentation is not valid, the election inspectors shall inform the elector and record the incident on the inspector's statement, including the type of document presented and why it was not acceptable. If the provided documentation is valid, the elector must sign the poll or supplemental poll list, note on the inspector statement that the elector provided the required documentation, initial and date the provisional ballot reporting form to indicate that the elector provided the required documentation. Election inspectors should offer the elector the option of spoiling the provisional ballot and voting a new ballot. If the elector chooses to spoil the provisional ballot certificate envelope is removed from the inspector's certificate of provisional ballot envelope and given to the elector. The elector should remove the provisional ballot and spoil it by making a small tear in the ballot, rendering it unusable. Election inspectors document the incident and spoiled ballot on the inspector's statement. The elector signs the poll list. The elector is then issued a sequential voter number, which is recorded on the poll list and noted on the provisional ballot reporting form by marking on poll list in the column labeled voter number issued. The elector is given a new ballot. If the elector chooses to cast the provisional ballot, note on the inspector's statement and initial and date the provisional ballot reporting form that the elector provided the required documentation. Remove the elector's provisional ballot certificate envelope from the inspector's certificate of provisional ballots envelope. Verify the provisional ballot certificate envelope has not been opened or tampered with. If the provisional ballot certificate envelope has been tampered with, the election inspector shall spoil the provisional ballot and instruct the elector to cast a new ballot. The elector then signs the poll list. The elector is issued a sequential voter number, which is recorded on the poll list and noted on the provisional ballot reporting form by marking on poll list in the column labeled voter number issued. Provide the elector with the provisional ballot certificate envelope and instruct him or her to remove the ballot and replace it in the ballot box or voting equipment. Collect the used provisional ballot certificate envelope from the elector and place it back in the inspector's certification of provisional ballots envelope. Requirements for processing provisional ballots. A provisional ballot reporting form EL123R must be completed by the election inspectors at the polling place, listing all of the electors who cast a provisional ballot. The chief inspector should maintain communication with the municipal clerk regarding the number of provisional ballots issued on election day. Frequently asked questions about provisional voting. Can a voter who is in the wrong polling place cast a provisional ballot? No, a voter in the wrong polling place may not cast a provisional ballot. Can a voter who does not have proof of residence vote a provisional ballot? No, a voter without acceptable proof of residence may not vote a provisional ballot. Can election inspectors ask the voter to return with the needed documents on election day instead of issuing a provisional ballot? They can suggest it, but a voter who casts a provisional ballot must be informed they have until 4 p.m. the Friday after the election to provide the municipal clerks with the necessary documentation. Does a voter who casts a provisional ballot sign the poll list? Not unless the voter returns to the polling place by 8 p.m. on election night with the required documentation. See the additional related training materials for additional resources about provisional voting. Thank you for watching. If you have any questions that were not answered about special procedures on Election Day, please do not hesitate to contact your municipal clerk or Wisconsin Elections Commission.
Okay, the next topic we're going to touch on is checking in voters. If you cannot find a voter in the poll book, make sure to check the supplemental poll list in the back of the book, or verify that they're in the correct polling place. Maybe they are a resident in the town of Cross Plains. Maybe they thought they registered but have not yet. Next, you ask them to verify their address. If it does not match, they will need to re-register with their new address. In the signature box, if you notice it says absentee issued, you will need to ask if they returned the absentee ballot that was issued. If yes, then do not issue them a ballot. If they did not return the absentee, then they may vote at the polls. And then a reminder that the residency requirement is 28 days. This next slide is on accessibility. These instances are not always common, but it's good to get a refresher about what to do in case voters need assistance. We'll just go through a couple of these. If the voter needs assistance marking the ballot, they can choose anyone to help them mark the ballot as long as the assistant is not their employer or union representative. The voter is unable to sign or make their mark on the poll book. Says voters who are unable to sign the poll book due to a disability are exempt from this requirement. Write exempt by order of inspectors in the signature box. If the voter is unable to announce their name or address, they may have someone else, perhaps a poll worker, announce their name and address on their behalf. Please be cognizant that some voters may need an interpreter or have visual or hearing impairments or may have dementia. The express vote machine may be helpful to these voters. And as with all voters, be kind, courteous, make eye contact, and don't rush them. We're going to talk a little bit about safety and security in electioneering. So if there is a report of electioneering within 100 feet of the entrance, politely ask them to leave the no electioneering zone and notify the chief inspector. Electioneering is the activity of trying to persuade people to vote for a particular political party or candidate. This could include signs or verbal activity. If someone comes in and asks to be a poll watcher, observer, or challenger, have them register with the chief inspector. Chief inspectors get to wear many hats on election day. They may need to make sure that voters and poll workers have a safe, secure environment. They need to document any incidents that occur and keep things running smoothly. Next, we'll just talk about some basic reminders. Proof of residence is required to register to vote, and then the proof of ID is required to receive a ballot. The proof of residence must list a current address, but the ID proof does not have to list a current address. And then some acceptable common forms of proof of identification is a valid Wisconsin driver's license or Wisconsin ID card. A license or ID card that says valid without photo is acceptable. US passport, a military ID card. And then also, if needed, a voter can receive up to 3 ballots. The voter will need to spoil the previous ballots, and it will need to be documented in the poll book. Absentee voting has been widely used the last 2 years. Voters may request an absentee ballot for any election for any reason. They may do so on the myvote.wi.gov website, by mailing in an application form, or send an email or fax to the clerk. All requests may be or must be written. You cannot do a verbal request. The application deadline to have a ballot mailed to you is 5 p.m. on the Thursday before the election. Voters may vote in person absentee up until 5 p.m. on the Friday preceding the election. Absentee ballots must be returned by 8 p.m. on election day. Absentee envelopes that are received by mail or dropped off at the clerk's office are verified for correct information and signatures by both the voter and a witness. And depending on the number of absentees we get back, the clerk's office will pre-number the ballots and write them in the poll books. As of February 23rd, the current rule is that absentee ballot drop boxes are not allowed. If a voter places their ballot in a drop box, they will be contacted to let them know that the vote will not be counted and make alternative arrangements. Also, only a voter can drop off their absentee ballot in person. You cannot have someone else do it for you or drop off anyone's ballot except your own. If the absentee ballots have been pre-numbered and marked in the poll books, then election inspectors will process these as time allows throughout the day. The inspector will say the name out loud, open the envelope, and then run the ballot through the machine, saving the envelopes. If the absentee ballots have not been pre-numbered, then the election inspector will get in line with the absentee ballot and be assigned a number in the poll book prior to casting the ballot. If a ballot is rejected, they'll verify if the markings are distinct enough that the ballot can be remade. Document any remakes in the inspector's statement log. That concludes our training for 2022. If you have any questions or comments about maybe things you'd like to see in future trainings, I'm more than happy to listen to suggestions. My contact information is there on the screen. The phone number is 608-798-3241, extension 106, or my email is bobby@cross-plains.wi.us. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today.